Welcome back to the Psyche and Singularity series. I've been going over my book, Psyche and Singularity, Jungian Psychology, and Holographic String Theory. In the previous video, I compared this union of Carl Jung's psychology and Leonard Suskind's holographic string theory to the Vedanta philosophy of India. And in this video, I'll be comparing this Jung-Susskind synthesis to Plato's cosmology, which I note in the book seems even more relevant to Susskind because he is coming in that academic tradition of mathematical astronomy and physics that originated in Plato's academy, the original academy. And I'm repeatedly fascinated by the fact that the cosmology Susskind came up with in string theory is so similar to the cosmology that Plato portrays in his dialogues, in which he initiated this quest to accurately describe the cosmos with mathematics. Is that just a coincidence? I don't think it is, although the irony is that Leonard Susskind presents his cosmology as the alternative to intelligent design theories of the universe and any kind of a theory of an ensouled universe. So, having said that, I will very briefly go over what Leonard Suskind's cosmology is. I know if you've been watching this whole series, this can get monotonous, but some people will just come and see just one or two of the videos, and then I'll show how it is very similar to Plato's cosmology as presented first in the Timaeus and then in the Republic. So according to Leonard Susskind, we live in a universe which is one bubble in a megaverse of universes. Our universe originated from a gravitational singularity at the Big Bang, from which space-time emerged. Space-time expands at an exponential rate because of the creation and destruction of virtual particle-antiparticle pairs in the quantum vacuum. That's called dark energy. And where space is expanding at the speed of light in the spherical border from our perspective on Earth, it's a geocentric perspective because it's all relative to your observational standpoint, and we stand on the Earth. So from our standpoint on Earth, space-time is expanding at the speed of light at the spherical border, the horizon of the cosmos, where, according to string theory, every bit of information that describes the past, the present, and the future of three-dimensional space is recorded, interwoven by these fundamental threads of energy, and then radiated back with the cosmic microwave background radiation, the echo of the Big Bang, to create this holographic movie of three-dimensional forms, like my body here and the whole world we perceive naturally on a day-to-day basis as reality, according to Leonard Susskind, is actually an illusion, a holographic, a cinematic hologram. And the film in which this information is stored timelessly is at the horizon of the cosmos. So, we'll see that all of those essential ingredients of Leonard Suskind's cosmology you can see in Plato's dialogues, especially the Republic and the Timaeus. And I will start with the Timaeus, even though it follows the Republic in the natural order of Plato's dialogues. I started with the Timaeus because it very clearly describes the universe as a sphere with a soul in the center that also encompasses the exterior horizon, where all of the information that describes the physical objects in the interior of the universe are stored and from which they radiate in. In the Timaeus, Plato doesn't mention the threads that are so fundamental to string theory, but Plato does mention those in the Myth of Earth, the end of the Republic. So if you combine the Republic and the Timaeus, there you have all the basic ingredients of Suskind's model of the universe. The Timaeus is called that because it's spoken by a Pythagorean astronomer named Timaeus, and Socrates asks him to give his account. In the beginning, the preface to the dialogue implies that it's coming the day after the Republic was spoken, the conversation that Socrates had with several people, including Plato's brothers Glaucon and Adimantas, about the ideal society. and it included an entire cosmology and a political system. Now it's staged as the following day, and it's someone else's turn to talk, and now it rests with Timaeus, and he describes his vision of the universe. So I'll just read a few selections from the Timaeus and a few comments by string theorists, and especially the mathematician Shing-Tung Yau. And I hope that's how his name is supposed to be pronounced. But he was the co-discoverer of the Calabi Yau manifolds, which are the geometrical shapes that the 6 higher dimensions, according to Suskind's version of string theory, there's, in addition to the 3 spatial dimensions we're familiar with, there's 6 more that are compactified at the Planck length of space-time in geometrical shapes that Shing-Tung Yau helped to discover, Calabi Yau manifolds. And the Calabi Yau manifolds, compares his discovery to Plato's Timaeus. He wrote a book which he begins and ends with references to Plato's Timaeus, saying there are many parallels between Plato's cosmology and the Timaeus and string theory. So that's great support for what I'm trying to do in my book. So I'll just read a little bit here from Timaeus. So in the dialogue he says, "On this wise, using the language of probability, we may say that the world came into being, a living creature, truly endowed with soul and intelligence by the providence of God." So it is an intelligent design cosmology. And then he'll go on to describe, "Such was the whole plan of the eternal God about the God that was to be." The God that was to be is the cosmos, the universe. "He made it smooth and even, having a surface in every direction, equidistant from the center, a body entire and perfect and formed out of perfect bodies, and in the center he put the soul, which he diffused throughout the body, making it also to be the exterior environment of it. And he made the universe a circle moving in a circle." So he's describing a spherical universe. The soul is in the center, but it also encompasses the exterior environment, which is an important parallel I'm drawing with Big Bang cosmology. The singularity, I'm saying, is equivalent to the soul or the psyche. That's the equation, psyche equals singularity. So the soul of the universe is in the center. It also encompasses the horizon, according to Timaeus. And that, I'm saying, is what Leonard Susskind's cosmology indicates if we interpret the singularity as the psyche. Because there's the singularity in the center. It diffuses throughout the spherical volume of space because it creates from space-time. Space-time unfolds from the singularity, and it also the singularity is located at each point of the encompassing horizon. The horizon is as if made of a spherical carpet of singularities. It's, from our perspective on Earth, the horizon is 15 billion light years away. But from people on the planet there, they see themselves as the center of the expanding universe and us at the horizon. I get into the details of the physics of why there is a singularity at each point of the horizon, but for the comparison with Timaeus, the important point is that according to Timaeus, the whole universe was created by the supreme God, and the soul is in the center, which encompasses the spherical circumference of it as well. So continuing in the Timaeus, he says, "Now when the Creator had framed the soul according to his will, he formed within her the corporeal universe and brought the two together and united them center to center. The soul interfused everywhere from the center to the circumference of heaven, of which also she is the external envelopment. Herself turning in herself began a divine beginning of never ceasing and rational life enduring throughout all time." So the important point for the parallels with Suskind's cosmology is that the soul interfused everywhere from the center to the circumference of heaven, of which also she is the external envelopment. So the craftsman God created first the soul of the universe, which is a central point and a spherical circumference. And then he superimposed the corporeal universe onto that, center to center, which in the book I compare to my attempt to superimpose Suskind's black hole cosmology onto Carl Jung's archetype of the self, the natural images that emerge from which he says is a mandala, a sphere with a point in the center. And that is what, very similar to what Timaeus is describing here. So, it's a pretty good parallel already with a central soul that encompasses the exterior horizon and the singularity that does the same in Big Bang cosmology. But does Timaeus say anything about how the material world is conserved within this circumference of the universe and radiates back from it? And yes, he does say something about that. So I'll read that part. So I'm just going to read from the book here. After describing the central point of the universe as the location of its soul, which permeates the volume of space and envelops the spherical horizon, Timaeus later says that the outermost sphere actually has no shape at all. This, and then here comes the quote, mother and receptacle of all created and visible and in any way sensible things, an invisible and formless being which receives all things, and in some mysterious way partakes of the intelligible and is most incomprehensible. So I'm comparing his description there of the mother and receptacle of all created things with Susskind's holographic horizon of the cosmos. Just like all of the information that's expanding away from us is absorbed into the horizon of the cosmos, it also radiates back in with the cosmic microwave background radiation on the threads, the fundamental threads of string theory. And so if you compare the Timaeus with Susskind's holographic principle and his principle of cosmic complementarity, then you have a good explanation for the seeming contradiction in the Timaeus. Well, it's a sphere, but now you say it's formless. Later, he's going to even compare it to dodecahedron. I'll get to that. A spherical dodecahedron that's simultaneously formless. How would you describe that in current cosmology? Well, according to Susskind, if you're standing away on the inside of the universe looking at the horizon, if you had a telescope and you saw a body moving towards that horizon, it would get smeared out all around the inner border of the sphere and then radiate back in with the cosmic microwave background radiation. But if you were the person approaching that horizon, you wouldn't feel yourself getting smeared out on the infinitely hot horizon of the cosmos. You'd pass right on through without noticing anything, although you would not be able to send a signal, even at the speed of light, back into the observable universe from the people's perspective who are still inside the universe, because space is expanding away from them at the speed of light. So it's there from our perspective, the horizon of the cosmos, but from someone out there, it's not there. So it's a spherical horizon. At the same time, it's a formless thing. In some mysterious way, the holographic principle says the information that describes the interior of the universe is conserved there. Every point of the past, the present, and the future is interwoven at every point of the horizon of the cosmos. So that starts to shed light on this mysterious and incomprehensible mother and receptacle. So I'll read this very crucial passage again. He describes the horizon of the cosmos, Timaeus does, as the mother and receptacle of all created and visible and in any way sensible things, an invisible and formless being which receives all things, and in some mysterious way partakes of the intelligible and is most incomprehensible. So how does the mother substance of the horizon partake of the intelligible? The intelligible is another word for the realm of the eternal forms. This is Plato's theory of absolute ideas. According to Plato, and this will become clearer in the cave allegory in the Republic, which I'll be turning to next, but according to Plato's basic philosophy, all of the material objects we perceive are like shadows of eternal forms, perfect forms, the ideal forms of those things. So any tree you see is an imperfect copy of the perfect idea of tree. And then there are more abstract forms such as justice. Any example of justice you might see on earth is an imperfect reflection of the idea of perfect justice, which exists in a spiritual world, and all of those ideas are contained in and radiate from the ultimate idea of the good. So I'll go over all this again in the cave allegory. Timaeus brings up this philosophy in this next passage where he talks about the fundamental elements, earth, water, fire, and air. How are they created? And this is where Shing-Tung Yau is really comparing what he did with finding the geometrical shapes of space-time around which these threads are woven. He's comparing that to Timaeus's theory of the atoms. The fundamental atoms that make earth, water, air, and fire, says Timaeus, are made of two types of right-angled triangles which combine in various ways to create what are now known as the Platonic solids, because of this discussion in the Timaeus. Perfectly symmetrical geometrical shapes. There's the cube, the tetrahedron, the dodecahedron's the biggest one, but I'm not going to focus on the specifics of that theory so much right now as I am on the comparison of string theory that Shing-Tung Yau makes to the Timaeus. But as part of that conversation, Timaeus asks the group, is there any self-existent fire, and do all those things we call self-existent exist? Or are only those things which we see or in some way perceive through the bodily organs truly existent? So he's asking, are there absolute ideas? Is there an absolute idea of fire, the perfect conceptual essence of fireness, of which all of the flames that you see on earth are imperfect reflections? Or are the things that you see with your eyes, as well as the things that you smell, hear, touch, and taste, are those all that's real? In current academic philosophy, those two opinions are called rationalism, the belief that there are absolute ideas which reason can perceive, and on the other side, empiricism. All that's real is what you can perceive with your five sense organs. So Timaeus asks, are there absolute ideas? And he's assuming everyone agrees. Socrates certainly agrees because he just gave that theory the day before in the Republic. But then Timaeus says, well, okay, how then are these absolute eternal ideas related to the physical imperfect reflections that they project? Where's the connecting point? And so he comes up with three fundamental ingredients of existence instead of two. Instead of just saying there's the absolute ideas and their shadowy reflections, he inserts an intermediary or an intermediatrix, the mother substance of space itself, which he correlates with the spherical border of the universe. So he divides, I'll read a little bit from the book here. Timaeus divides existence into three instead of two worlds: being, space, and generation. Being is the world of unchanging perfect forms. Generation is the world of always changing imperfect reflections of the perfect forms. And space is the intermediary between being and generation. So I will read this from the Timaeus. He says, there is a third nature, which is space, and is eternal, and admits not of destruction, and provides a home for all created things, and is apprehended, when all sense is absent, by a kind of spurious reason, and is hardly real, which we, beholding as in a dream, say of all existence that it must of necessity be in some place and occupy a space, but that what is neither in heaven nor on earth has no existence. For an image refers to the physical objects that we see, since the reality after which it is modeled does not belong to it, the absolute idea of which it's a reflection does not belong to it. So where does the image exist? And it exists ever as the fleeting shadow of some other, must be inferred to be in another, or it could not be at all. So there's the eternal absolute ideas, and then there's the material images of those ideas. What is the medium upon which those images exist? The absolute ideas are self-existent. They are their own ground. They're the fundamental ingredients of existence itself. So they don't need a canvas upon which to be woven, although you could say the canvas upon which they're woven is the idea of the good. And the idea of the good is the central point of the universe and the encompassing horizon. All of the absolute ideas I'm ultimately going to be saying here are interwoven at every point of the outermost sphere of the universe, and they give birth to the physical images that they project, these temporary three-dimensional images, via the mother substance of the circumference of the universe, which is so mysterious and can only be understood with a spurious kind of reason This is all similar to the string theory. It's kind of considered a spurious kind of reason because it cannot be empirically confirmed unless you take, for example, near-death experiences into account, in which case it has eyewitness testimony, so a point I make in the book. But nevertheless, the mathematics indicate that all of the information that creates the three-dimensional objects throughout the history of the universe are interwoven at every point of this horizon, just like the mother substance in Plato's Timaeus. Then he'll later go on in the Timaeus to say that that outermost sphere, the mother substance, he'll also equate with ether, the element ether. Just like in the Vedanta cosmology, the universe is a series of concentric spheres, earth, water, fire, and air, and the outermost is the ether element. And that's where the past, the present, and the future are conserved by a fundamental thread, akshara, the sutratman, upon which everything is interwoven in the interior volume of the universe. Similarly, in the Timaeus, the outermost receiving vessel, this mother substance, is compared to the ether, which is compared to a dodecahedron. So the horizon of the cosmos is spherical, it has no form at all, and it's dodecahedral in the Timaeus. If you put them all together, it's this spherical dodecahedron, and there was an astronomer who says that he thinks the cosmic horizon can be described as a higher dimensional spherical dodecahedron. I talk about that in the end notes, but I won't mention it here for fear of getting too long. So I will now quote from Shing-Tung Yau's book, The Shape of Inner Space, String Theory, and the Geometry of the Universe's Hidden Dimensions. So he was the co-discoverer of those geometrical shapes around which the threads of string theory are woven, and the geometrical shape of the space around which the threads are woven determines the kinds of quantum particles that we perceive. The threads vibrate. The combination of the vibrating thread and the geometry of the shapes of space around which they're woven account for the differences between photons, electrons, protons, different kinds of quarks. Any kind of fundamental particle is actually made of more fundamental threads and the fundamental shapes of space, these geometrical shapes. And so in his book, The Shape of Inner Space, String Theory and the Geometry of the Universe's Hidden Dimensions, he starts that book and he ends the book by deferring to Plato's Timaeus, referring to it and saying we should look to it for the future path of string theory. And I agree. The parallels that he focuses on, however, are his discovery of these shapes of space and Timaeus' introduction of the fundamental atoms of the universe, earth, water, fire, and air, and ether. He compares to these geometrical shapes. The cube, the tetrahedron, the octahedron, I'm forgetting one, and the icosahedron and the dodecahedron. So the cube is earth, tetrahedron is pointy triangle, or pyramid is fire. Water is the icosahedron, I think. Air is the octahedron, I hope that's the right word. The dodecahedron, which is like a soccer ball kind of, is the outermost sphere. And that's also the receptacle in the mother that contains all of these other atoms and projects them inward like a winnowing fan. So, but I will now read some of from Shing-Tung Yau's book. So he said, in basing his cosmology on these shapes, the Platonic solids, Plato correctly surmised that symmetry ought to lie at the heart of any credible description of nature. For if we are ever to produce a real theory of everything in which all the forces are unified and all the constituents obey a handful or two of rules, we'll need to uncover the underlying symmetry, the simplifying principle from which everything else springs. So I point out the ultimate simplifying symmetry from which everything else springs, I'm saying, is psyche equals singularity, because Carl Jung and Wolfgang Pauli said there should be a mirror symmetry between the laws of psychology and the laws of physics, because they both originate from the ultimate archetype, the unus mundus, the one, the self archetype, the God archetype. I'm also equating that with Plato's idea of the good, and the gravitational singularity. If everything emerges from the same ultimate archetype, if mind and matter both emerge from that transcendental, infinitely powerful source, then we should see these a mirror symmetry between physics and psychology. And I'm saying you can see this mirror symmetry. One of the points of evidence that Jung said you should look for to determine whether a worldview emerges from an archetype, an eternal idea of the collective unconscious mind, is if it has historical precedence. And we see this string theory, holographic string theory, has an enormous historical precedent in Plato's cosmology, from which the academic tradition originated. So that is also what Shing-Tung Yau points out near the end of his book. He says, "Let us end where we began, looking to the past in the hopes of gleaning hints about the road ahead." The year was 387 BC or thereabouts, when Plato established his academy, which is sometimes referred to as the world's first major university, even though the particulars of Plato's theory of everything as outlined in the Timaeus strike the modern sensibility as absurd, if not borderline psychotic. There are many parallels between his picture of the universe and that embodied in string theory. Plato was on the right track in many ways, identifying some of the key pieces of the puzzle, such as symmetry, duality, and the general principle of geometrization that we now believe any workable attempt to explain it all ought to include. So he saw many parallels between Plato's cosmology and string theory. He didn't notice the parallel with Plato's theory of the mother substance, in which all created things are they're gestating within this mother substance and then they're born from it. That is very similar to the holographic horizon of the cosmos that Leonard Susskind talks about. And in the next video, I will show how another prominent string theorist, Brian Greene, points to that very important parallel between holographic string theory and the horizon of the cosmos and Plato's cosmologies as presented specifically in the cave allegory.